So you're getting ready for a React.js interview.
What?
Well, you've come to the right place.
You have.
We're about to take a deep dive into the exciting world of React.js.
That's right.
Covering everything from the fundamentals to those tricky interview questions that might trip you up.
Yeah.
It's like your personal cheat sheet for acing that interview.
Think of it this way. Imagine you're building a dynamic, interactive social media app.
Okay.
React.js would be your secret weapon for creating a smooth, engaging experience for your users.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Okay.
Before we get too deep into building our dream app, let's break down exactly what React.js is.
Okay.
I know it's used everywhere these days.
It is, yeah.
But I bet some listeners might be surprised to hear it's actually just a JavaScript library.
That's right. React.js is an open-source front-end JavaScript library developed by Facebook. It's become incredibly popular because it's specifically designed for building those slick, interactive user interfaces you see all over the web.
Right.
Especially in single-page applications where it really shines.
And when you say single-page applications, you mean...
Think about your favorite social media platform.
Okay.
You can scroll through your feed, like posts, leave comments, all without the page ever fully reloading.
Right.
That seamless experience is often powered by a framework like React.js.
Ah, okay. I get it. And it's not just popular.
No.
It's practically dominating the job market right now, right?
Absolutely. According to a 2021 developer survey, React.js was the most used front-end technology.
Wow.
And that trend hasn't slowed down. Mastering React can be a huge boost to your career as a developer.
So let's jump into some of the basic concepts behind React.js.
Okay, sure.
One term I keep hearing is JSX.
Yes.
What's the deal with that? It sounds kind of technical.
JSX might sound intimidating, but it's actually pretty straightforward. It's a syntax extension for JavaScript that lets you write HTML-like code directly within your JavaScript.
Oh.
So you can structure your UI elements using familiar HTML tags. Okay.
But within the context of your JavaScript code.
So instead of having separate files for HTML and JavaScript, you can kind of blend them together.
Exactly. This makes the code way more readable and easier to understand.
Yeah.
Especially for those who are comfortable with HTML.
Right.
Plus, it gives you the full power of JavaScript to control how those elements behave.
Okay, that makes sense. And it reminds me of another term that's often mentioned alongside React.js, the virtual DOM.
Yes.
I've heard it's a big part of what makes React so fast, but how does it actually work?
Let's go back to that social media app we were talking about.
Okay.
Imagine you have a feed with hundreds of posts and comments constantly updating. If the browser had to redraw the entire page every time someone liked a post or added a comment, it would be incredibly slow and clunky.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced laggy websites before. It's super frustrating.
Exactly. That's where the virtual DOM comes in.
Okay.
It's like a lightweight copy of the actual web page's structure.
Living in the computer's memory.
Right.
When you make a change in your React app, it updates the virtual DOM first. Then React cleverly compares this updated virtual DOM to the previous version.
Right.
And figures out the most efficient way to update the real web page.
Okay.
So instead of redrawing everything,
right,
it only changes the parts that actually need updating.
Ah, so it's all about making those updates super targeted and efficient.
You got it.
Yeah.
This means fewer updates to the real page, resulting in a much smoother and faster user experience.
Right.
It's like having a super organized assistant who knows exactly what needs to be changed without having to redo everything from scratch.
I can definitely see how that would be a game changer for complex applications. Speaking of changes, how are events handled in React.js? Is it the same as traditional HTML?
It's similar, but React adds its own flavor to event handling. For example, you'll notice that event names in React use camel case, like on-click instead of on-click. And instead of assigning a string of code to an event attribute, you'll use functions as event handlers.
So what's the advantage of using functions instead of just a string of code?
It keeps your code much more organized and manageable.
Okay.
You can define your event handling logic separately, and then simply reference that function within your JSX, making your code easier to read and debug.
Okay, so we have JSX for streamlining the structure, virtual DOM for optimizing updates and functions for handling events. Is there anything else we should know about how data flows in a React application?
One of the key principles of React is unidirectional data flow. This means data flows in one direction from parent components to child components. Think of it like a family tree. Information is passed down from the top, making it easier to track and manage.
So it's like a top-down approach to managing information. Why is that so important?
It helps prevent data from getting tangled or conflicting, making your app more predictable and easier to debug. You always know where your data is coming from and going to.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I remember struggling with the concept of keys when I was first learning React.
Yeah,
Can you explain why they are important?
absolutely. Let's say you're building a to-do list app.
Okay.
Each task in your list would be represented by a component in React.
Right.
Keys help React keep track of each of these components,
Okay.
especially when you're adding, deleting, or reordering tasks.
So if I'm rearranging my to-do list, keys help React figure out what's changed.
Precisely. Keys act like unique identifiers for each item in a list, helping React efficiently update the virtual DOM and avoid unnecessary re-rendering of the entire list.
Right.
It's like giving each task a unique ID number, so React can track them easily.
It sounds like keys are crucial for keeping things organized and efficient. Before we move on to the advantages of React.js,
Sure.
can you quickly explain the different types of components I might encounter?
Sure. You'll primarily work with two types:
Okay.
function components and class components.
Do I?
Function components are simpler and more common these days. Especially as React has evolved, they're basically JavaScript functions that return JSX,
Okay.
describing what the component should look like.
And what about class components? When would I use those?
Class components were more common in older versions of React.
Okay.
They're a bit more complex
Right.
and allow you to manage internal state and lifecycle methods, which control how the component behaves over time.
Okay.
However, for many simple use cases, function components are now the preferred way to build your UI elements.
Got it. So we've covered JSX virtual DOM event, handling unidirectional data flow keys, and the two types of components. That's a lot to digest, but I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together to make React so powerful.
It's like building a house.
Yeah.
Each of these concepts is a different building block that contributes to the overall structure and functionality of your React application.
I like that. Now, I'm curious, what are some of the specific advantages of choosing React over other frameworks or libraries? What makes it stand out from the crowd?
Well, as we've touched on already, React.js offers some serious performance advantages,
Okay.
thanks in large part to the virtual DOM and its efficient way of handling updates.
Uh-huh.
This leads to faster loading times and a smoother, more responsive experience for your users.
Right.
Plus, it's incredibly versatile. You can use React on both the client side and the server side for even greater performance gains.
Okay, so it's fast, efficient, and adaptable. Anything else?
Remember how we talked about JSX making code more readable?
Yeah.
Well, that's another huge advantage.
Okay.
It can significantly speed up development time
Right.
because developers can more easily understand and work with the code, especially if they come from an HTML background.
Uh-huh.
And React plays well with others.
Okay.
It integrates seamlessly with a wide range of other frameworks and libraries, which gives you a lot of flexibility in how you build your applications.
In today's world where everything is interconnected, that's super important. What about testing? Is it easy to test React applications?
React makes writing UI test cases a breeze compared to some other frameworks.
Oh.
This means you can catch bugs early in the development process
Right.
and ensure you're shipping high-quality code that works as expected.
So to recap, we've got enhanced performance, server-side rendering capabilities, improved code readability, seamless integration with other tools, and simplified testing. It sounds like React.js is ticking all the boxes.
It really does.
Right.
But we've only scratched the surface.
Oh.
There's a whole world of intermediate and advanced concepts that we can explore next to help you truly master React and nail that interview.
Let's do it. I'm ready to go deeper.
All right, are you ready to delve deeper into the world of React.js? We've laid a solid foundation, so now let's explore some of those intermediate and advanced concepts that really make React shine.
I'm all ears. We touched on the virtual DOM earlier, and I'm curious to understand how it handles more complex scenarios. Let's say we're building a huge online store with thousands of products.
Okay.
Wouldn't the virtual DOM get bogged down with all those updates?
That's a great question. You're right. In a large-scale application like that, even with the virtual DOM, performance can become a concern if we're not careful.
Right.
That's why React developers often turn to state management libraries,
Yeah.
like Redux, to
Uh,
help manage complexity.
Redux, I've heard that name thrown around a lot, but I've always been a bit intimidated by it.
Yeah.
What exactly does it do, and why is it so useful for larger applications?
Think of Redux as a central hub for all the data that drives your application.
Okay.
In a complex app, you might have components nested deep within other components.
Right.
And passing data down through this hierarchy can get messy and inefficient.
Yeah.
Redux provides a single store where you can manage the state, making it accessible to any component that needs it.
So instead of props being passed down through a long chain of components,
Yes,
any component can just grab the data it needs directly from the Redux store.
exactly. This pattern is often called prop drilling.
Okay.
And it can make your code harder to read and maintain. Redux helps you avoid this by providing a single source of truth for your data,
Yeah.
making your application more predictable and easier to debug.
Ah. So it's not just about performance, but also about code organization and maintainability. That makes a lot of sense. Now, while we're on the topic of managing data, you mentioned a concept called lifting state up earlier. Can you elaborate on what that means and why it's a useful pattern in React?
Imagine you have two sibling components that need to share the same piece of data.
Okay.
Instead of duplicating that data in each component's state, you can lift it up to their parent component.
Right.
This way, the parent component manages the state,
Okay.
and both siblings can access it through props.
So it's like finding the common ancestor in the component family tree and putting the shared data there. What are the benefits of doing that?
Precisely. Lifting state up helps you avoid redundancy, and your code promotes better organization and makes it easier to control how data is updated and shared across your application.
I see. Now let's move on to a concept that always sounds a bit mysterious to me. Higher order components.
Yes.
Or HOCs. Can you demystify this for me? What are they and how do they promote code reusability?
HOCs might sound complex,
Right.
but they're essentially functions that take a component
Okay.
and return a new enhanced component with added functionality.
Okay. Yeah.
Think of it like giving your component a power-up.
I like it.
Let's say you have multiple components that need to fetch data from an API.
Right.
Instead of writing the same fetching logic in each component, you can create an HOC that handles the data fetching.
Okay.
And then wrap those components with it.
Ah, so it's like abstracting that common logic into a reusable module that any component can tap into.
Exactly.
That's a clever way to avoid repeating yourself.
This keeps your code DRY, don't repeat yourself, makes it more maintainable, and allows you to easily add or modify functionality across multiple components without having to change each one individually.
That's super powerful. Now, shifting gears a bit, I'm curious about error handling in React. How do error boundaries work, and why are they so important?
You've probably encountered the dreaded white screen of death when an error occurs in a web application.
Oh, yeah.
In traditional JavaScript applications, a single error can often bring down the entire app.
Right.
React's error boundaries act like safety nets,
Okay.
preventing a single component's error from crashing the whole system.
So it's like damage control for your application.
Exactly. If a component within an error boundary throws an error, the boundary can catch it, log the error for debugging, and gracefully display a fallback UI to the user, preventing a jarring crash.
That's a great way to improve the user experience even when something goes wrong behind the scenes. Now, I know our listener is eager to ace that React.js interview, so let's shift our focus to some of those common interview questions that often trip people up.
Absolutely. One of the most fundamental questions you'll likely encounter is explain the difference between props and state.
Okay.
It's a simple question,
Right.
but it tests your understanding of how data flows and changes within a React application.
We've touched on both of these concepts, but can you give us a concise way to explain the difference in an interview setting?
Think of props as the information that a component receives from its parent.
Okay.
It's like a set of instructions that tell the component how to behave.
Right.
It's external and typically cannot be changed by the component itself. State, on the other hand, is internal to the component and can change over time in response to user interactions or other events.
Okay.
It's what gives your component its dynamic behavior.
So props are like the blueprint, and state is how the component actually comes to life and interacts with the user.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sure.
What about the concept of pure components? I've seen that mentioned, but I'm not quite sure what makes them special.
Pure components are all about optimization.
Okay.
They're essentially components that only re-render if their props or state have actually changed.
Okay.
This can significantly improve performance
Right.
because it prevents unnecessary re-renders, especially in applications with a lot of dynamic content.
So it's like React is being smart about when it needs to update the user interface.
Exactly. It's a way to ensure that your application stays fast and responsive even when dealing with complex data and frequent updates.
Now, I'm sure the question of optimizing React application performance comes up a lot in interviews. What are some key tips or strategies that our listeners should be prepared to discuss?
It's important to demonstrate that you understand the factors that can impact React performance
Right.
and has strategies to address them. You can talk about techniques like using keys and lists, which we discussed earlier,
Okay.
as well as memoizing components, which is a way to cache the results of expensive calculations to avoid repeating them unnecessarily.
So it's about being mindful of how often components re-render and finding ways to minimize that when possible.
Absolutely. And it's not just about knowing these techniques in theory, but also being able to discuss how you've applied them in real-world projects.
So having a compelling story about how you optimize a project and the impact it had can really impress the interviewer.
Definitely. It shows that you can not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk when it comes to building performant React applications.
This is all incredibly helpful. I feel like I'm getting a much deeper understanding of React and how to approach those tricky interview questions.
That's great to hear. Now, before we wrap up, there's one more common interview question. We need to discuss one that really tests your ability to connect the dots between theory and practice. But I think it'll be a good place to pick up after a quick moment for our listener to process all this great information.
Sounds good. We'll be right back to tackle that final question and give our listener all the tools they need to ace that React.js interview. All right, we're back and ready to tackle that final interview question you mentioned. What is it and how can our listener prepare for it?
Get ready for this one.
Okay.
Walk me through how the virtual DOM helped improve performance in a project you've worked on. This question is a favorite among interviewers
Yeah.
because it goes beyond just reciting definitions.
Right.
They want to see that you can apply your knowledge to real-world scenarios.
That makes sense. It's one thing to know the theory, but it's another to demonstrate how you've actually used it to solve problems. So what's the best way to approach a question like that?
Specificity is key.
Okay.
Don't just give a generic answer about how the virtual DOM makes things faster.
Okay.
Instead, paint a vivid picture for the interviewer.
Okay.
Describe a specific project where performance was a challenge.
Uh-huh.
What were the issues you faced? How did you leverage the virtual DOM to address them?
So instead of just saying, it improved performance,
Yes,
I should give concrete examples.
exactly. For instance, you could talk about an e-commerce app you worked on where the product listings were slow to update.
Okay.
Explain how you used keys to help React identify and update only the changed product items rather than re-rendering the entire list every time. Highlight the positive impact this had on the user experience.
So it's about showcasing your problem-solving skills and demonstrating how your understanding of the virtual DOM translated into tangible results. The interviewer wants to see that aha moment where you made the connection between theory and practice.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to talk about what you learned from the experience.
Right.
Maybe you initially tried a different approach that didn't work as well. Sharing those insights shows that you're a reflective developer who's constantly learning and improving.
That's great advice. I feel much more prepared to tackle those interview questions now. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I've gained a much deeper understanding of React.js, from the fundamental concepts to those advanced techniques that can really set a developer apart.
I'm glad you found it valuable. Remember, the key to acing any technical interview is a combination of solid preparation, clear communication, and genuine enthusiasm for the technology. The more you work with React.js and explore these concepts, the more confident you'll become.
Absolutely. And don't forget to showcase your passion for building amazing user experiences. Interviewers love to see that spark.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from JSX and virtual DOM to state management and interview tips. Any final words of wisdom for our listener as they embark on their React.js journey?
As you dive deeper into React.js and build your own projects, remember that all these technical details ultimately serve one purpose: to create a delightful experience for your users. Keep that in mind as you make architectural decisions and write your code. That user-centric perspective will guide you toward building truly exceptional applications.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into React.js. We hope you found it valuable and are feeling more confident than ever to tackle those interviews.
Good luck.